Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Construct Strategically. Yarns with Andy. I've got Murray. Murray's got a wealth of experience in the construction industry and has been in the industry for over 30 years. So he's the managing director of Pivot. But yeah, let's hear from Murray. Murray, first off, thank you so much for being here, mate. I really
pleasure.
appreciate your time. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself and Pivot and.
What we do is we have a development management service and a construction company.
Right.
So we have high net worth clients that we look after who want to be involved in property development and be in that game, but they're usually time poor and they low expertise. So we've got this 6-stage system that we do as an end-to-end system for delivering development projects for people and making it lower risk and dependable returns.
Right, so it's literally all the way from land development right through to handing the keys to the customer.
Yeah, so we've got 6 systems, 6 stages. So the first stage is we go and find a piece of land, make sure it's suitable, and then we'll do a feasibility on it, make sure it stacks up. And then the third stage is planning consent. So what we do is everybody contracts to us and we will deliver the planning consent. And for the client, they've just got a simple contract for that. For that element, and then we do the building consent, and then the construction company delivers the building, and then we have a sales crew that really is involved with real estate agencies, and we manage that process and sell it down for them. So they basically put up equity, we deliver it, and their commitment for most of them is probably 1 to 2 hours a month, and over a 2-year period, most of them would make an average project would be $1 million.
Where do I sign up?
You just got to start with 2 to 5 million.
2 to 5 million. I don't have that kind of money, man. I'll be sitting here doing a podcast about that kind of money. No, but you do really do it end to end.
Yeah.
So you have kind of seen it all the way from concept right through to delivery.
Correct, yeah. So what we've developed is a bunch of standardized plans, really. So we're all about standardization. So we make the exterior look different, but the engine room of the buildings are very much the same. So we do 2-level terrace type developments or 3-level walk-up type developments. And we will do, an average development would be a standard size section, which you can, or a piece of land that you can buy at market. So we don't have a resource problem for finding the right sites. And they're small enough so that you can get in and out within a 2-year period, which is one of our risk mitigating factors.
2 years, right through from concept through to keys handover.
Concept through to delivery and done.
Oh, interesting. So let's talk to some of the key challenges that you've actually faced during that, because you're one of the very few companies, I'd say, in New Zealand that's involved end to end, right from concept through resource consent, building consent, finding the contractor through to delivery. So some of the challenges you face in that entire life cycle as a company?
Probably the biggest challenge is planning consents.
Planning consents?
Yeah, that's a really primary challenge, and that's really the time and the kind of odd things that council want you to deal with as changes and things to your projects.
So when you say planning consents, you mean resource consent?
Resource consent.
Resource consent.
Yeah. So resource and subdivision consents. You usually do together, and so that
also
quite
includes
a big
an EPA,
challenge.
I'm assuming.
What's that?
An EPA?
Yeah, and an EPA go. Well, so we do that while we do the construction consent. So,
right, okay.
So first of all, we would do so we would find a piece of land, we would do a suitability, we do a very quick concept on that site using our standardised pattern. So we look for sites that suit our designs rather than we find the site and then go, wonder what we'll do with it.
Right.
We know what we want to do, so we look for sites that suit. Then we just got to buy at the right price. Not always easy in a heated market like we've had. A lot easier right now. And then we would do a full feasibility on that site, and that would start with concept plans, and we would go through the programming and likely end costs. We get real estate parties to come in and give us evaluations on what's actually involved with likely end values, and then we'll do a cost structure back and do a reverse engineer on that to make sure we're paying the right price. Then we settle that land, or a client settles the land, so all the assets stay with them. And then we would put the planning consent together. So we would take that through that. All the consultants you need, which is about 10 or 11 consultants that you would need, and then they contract to us. We give a simple contract to the client, and we cash flow it, so they know exactly what they have to pay each month. And when each month we just make that claim. So all they've got to do is pay one bill a month, and then we deliver the product. But so that planning consent stage, that's the kind of the nebulous bit, just getting, and we try to design everything so it fits the planning rules, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get that approved automatically. So, and it takes ages. A few months ago, it would take 2 to 3 months just to get allocated to a planner to have a look at it, even though
for a resource
they're meant
consent
to do it in a month.
For a resource consent or a building consent?
Resource consent, yeah.
Well, why do you think that is?
Well, they were locked down with the lockdowns and the people working from home, and
shouldn't it be easier if it's not under lockdown?
Yeah, you would think so. But that just slowed everything down. Productivity definitely drops, I think, certainly for government departments anyway, and so they also had the planning changes that the government were bringing in, and they were dealing with all of that. So they would just not allocate your application to a council planner for 2-3 months sometimes, and then they would ask you for a time extension, which you have to give them, so that they can do it within their statutory period. So
I'm trying to understand the real reason for that delay. Is that because there's technical regulations, or is that purely a resource?
I think it's a resource issue. I'm not inside council, so I
understand that from your perspective.
My perspective, I would say it's a resource issue. I also think that councillors aren't incentivised to be super proactive about development. As developers, we think, hey, they're going to get all these more rates.
Yeah.
Surely they want that. But in actual fact, what they've got to spend on infrastructure, even though they take development contributions and so on off us, what they have to do in infrastructure to get those rates isn't actually a fair equity playoff. So they probably need better incentives, and I think their other issues are around risk management, and I think that's a massive, both in planning as well as building consents.
So if I'm in the council, what are some of the risks that I will be dealing with to approve a resource consent? I'm just trying to understand that better.
Yeah, so they've got all of these rules that they've
100%.
decided for the Resource Management Act to compliance, which were often the opposite of what was intended by the RMA, and they are looking to, they've fleshed it out, shall we say. So like we're doing a rural subdivision, which is quite different for us. It's a lifestyle type rural subdivision. And during the process, council had brought in all these rules around water and natural water areas and so on, which has completely stymied our original resource consent. So now we actually basically have to do a new resource consent for some of those rules. But there are rules that they've just brought in along the way as part of their view of the RMA. I don't think that was what the RMA originally was meant to streamline things, but it's actually, they turned it into an art form of holding us back.
Wow.
Not on purpose, I don't mean, but it's their interpretation of looking after the environment. And
that's fair call,
which
you've got to do.
Yeah, what you've got to do, yeah, absolutely.
Which I fully understand. That's why New Zealand is so beautiful.
But it just slows everything down to try and comply with a lot of those things. Some of them are nitpicky things. Some of them, we've had resource consents held up because they don't like our planting program and they want different types of planting. But they're good arguments.
But that shouldn't hold up you building the building, though, should it?
They should. Why don't you do this? So anyway, the council are trying to do the right thing, but I think that developers often feel frustrated with council that they're being obstructed. Whereas in fact, council are trying to do the right thing by the whole community usually, and with the plan that they have developed. And so that's why I'd say that some of the incentives aren't there for council to be keen to see something. So I'm dealing, say, currently with a provincial council on quite a large development down there, and their attitude is, we've got a housing crisis, how can we make this work for you? Yeah. So I've met with one of the senior planners, and he's gone, if you add this, this and this, we're going to make this work for you. And it was a completely different feeling. I've had that before in provincial areas, like, how can we make this work?
Yeah.
And I think that, say, Auckland is a bigger bureaucracy. Becoming a super city probably didn't help us.
Didn't help us, you said?
No.
Wow. I thought that was meant to streamline processes between all
But
the
I think it's
little
made a
mini
bigger
councils.
bureaucracy, so a bigger bureaucracy slows down. That's what I think. As an anti-bureaucratic person.
Yeah, me too.
That's my view of it, you know.
Yeah, and consortium, is it? What's the other subdivision of other just fast track consents? So the Greater Auckland Council has now set up a new division called consortium.
Yeah,
have
I think
I got
that's
that name
right. Correct. Yeah, I think that's correct. We haven't really tapped into that at all. We've given up having pre-app meetings with council. We basically try to design something that we think fits the plan, and we just lodge it. And that's primarily through the lockdown period. It was taking a lot longer to have the pre-app and then get a result out of it. We might as well just lodge and go. Yeah,
right. So let's say you work for the council. What are 3 things that you would do to fast track a resource consent?
I'm not really sure what they have to actually go through, so and tick off. But usually,
but you've had pain points,
yeah,
from being on the other side. I'm just asking you to put yourself in the council's shoes. And what are some of the things that you would suggest that they do to fast track?
I think pick up an application, and if you see some issues, either ring or contact the parties. So right now what they do is they make a raft of, they put it out to different departments, they get input, they make up a raft of issues, and they issue what's called an S92 letter. And then you are meant to respond to that and answer that. So the clock stops and you answer that. It's quite a good system, but if they actually did a quick thing and said, hey look, if you adjusted these things, you'd go a lot faster. And that's particularly true of building consents. If you actually just rang the architect and said, if you actually make these changes and you send them to me tomorrow, I'll process this. It's like a triage for consenting. I think you would actually, because what will happen is they send that letter out, then you go down the bottom of the pile again, and you've got to wait till all those questions are answered satisfactorily, and then the clock starts again. So I would think a better way to deal with the issues that you see that have come up, and being able to ring, for example, would be way faster than, and as a developer you'd appreciate it, get a call, say these are the kind of things you need to address, and you think, I'll start that tomorrow.
Great, okay, so them calling you and ringing is one thing,
that would be.
What else would you do?
I think from a council point of view, where I see, so there's a side to your question really, but the new changes that they're talking about to the RMA, getting rid of the RMA, a new thing, unless they address how council processes things, it will just end up being another long bureaucratic and possibly worse situation over the next 10 years or so. And it might start at the beginning to be better, but it'll end up being because council isn't incentivised enough, and their risk factors are not offset enough. And that's particularly true on the building consent side.
So you said council being incentivised a few times.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what I mean by that, but I know they're not that well incentivised because they have to, the council balance sheets are heavily indebted, and that's true around the country, which is why we have our low investment into the three waters, for example. And so they can't afford to, and the local council laws don't allow them to borrow any more than what they already have, so they're constricted on what they can do. So they will tend to hold back development in areas because they don't have the money and resources to service those new areas. So you get lots of places like future urban zone, and the reason it's future is there's no infrastructure there. Otherwise, you look at this beautiful land that could be built on housing there, but there's no infrastructure. So one of the things that central government could do would be to set up an infrastructure fund that councils could tap into, like a bond or something like that. And I think the private citizens would invest in a bond like that if it was a government-backed thing. And that could be an asset on central government's books that actually frees up local government to actually put the infrastructure in something like that, or possibly a share of the GST that's raised through new bills could go back to local government.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But let me play devil's advocate back to councils processing resource consents faster. So the councils wouldn't have to compile all of those comments for S92, is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Yep, to stop the clock and send it back to you. Let's say you had a competent architect who's put himself in the council's shoes to design the first set of designs accordingly. Would that not help the process go a lot smoother?
Yeah, it's a good question. You actually do try to do that. But it's very hard to get a design that suits the planning rules exactly. So you have little incursions on the recession planes, and it might be a little bit, but or you don't quite get enough landscape living area or permeable surfaces and things like that. So that's the point of a resource consent, is to get that approved, because they are of minor impact on the development or on the neighbourhood or whatever. And so you try to do that as much, and we try to be like, our ideal is to put in a fully compliant design, but it's actually really hard to do, and then make that development actually commercially viable. So you usually got little infringements at least that you need to get ticked off, and they're the things that they come back about. And we have a development that we've got in for planning consent right now, and it's probably been in for 4 months, I suppose. And one of the things they asked us to do is move the rear portion of the terraces 300 millimetres towards one of the other boundaries, even though it increased the incursion into the recession plane, because they'd rather have a little bit more living space, yard for, which we're happy to do. But then that changed all our drains. Move the manholes, all those.
There's
kind
a flow-on
of things.
effect all the way through.
They asked us to change the landscaping plants, go away from shrubs because cars might run over them, and go for more climbing vines, and they're all good inputs in actual fact. But we wouldn't have dared to put that plan originally in 300 millimetres back, because it would have been, we think, a too big a cut into the recession plane.
Right. Interesting. So that's a big challenge. So if you had to look at that entire processing time frame, so once you submit your designs to the council, they have 20 days to approve it. Is that right?
Yeah, they've got 20 working days to approve it, unless they ask questions and stop the clock. And there is it's quite a robust system. So they look at it, they issue you your S92 questions. So there's a planner at council or a subcontracted planner from another private planning agency. And they'll ask the questions, you respond to them, and if they accept it, that pushes it further down the chain. So they get everyone to tick, they go to the different departments and get that to be ticked off. When they're happy with that, they issue you a set of draft conditions for the resource consent, and then you read those, and if you're happy, you say, I accept them, and then it goes up to a team leader, and the team leader approves it, and you get your resource consent.
How long does that process take?
So that's meant to take 20 working days. But,
that entire process?
Yeah, but
that doesn't account for stopping the clock, does it?
No.
So I'm saying include stopping the clock.
So
from the time you lodge to the time you get a resource consent approved in your hand, how long is that process on average on your development?
We would allow between 2 and 4 months for that process.
Wow. A process that should take 20 days is taking anywhere between 40 working days to 80 working days.
Yeah. And if you are doing a very large project, that might be a 5-year project, you're going to allow a year or something like that.
A year?
Yeah. And so a lot of people...
Just to get through the paperwork?
A lot of developers for high-rise buildings, for example, have stepped away from those because of the length of time it takes to get it approved.
Yeah.
So that no one wants to do them anymore.
Yeah. I mean, my bread and butter is high-rise buildings.
Bad news for you then.
Bad news for me, you reckon? I've never been this busy, mate. Trust me, I'm so busy. It's ridiculous.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. No, I only get involved in a stage in the process where you've got a set of building consents available, or you've lodged a consent. That's when I step in to create the methodology and write a program that works around an almost consented design or a 60%
Right.
Or develop design is what you
Okay.
call it, I suppose. Yeah.
So you're doing like all the building methodology and programming?
It's kind of what I do, yeah. So I kind of sort of figure out the methodology, or there'd be a team of people that would develop methodology, and I'll help them put a program works together.
Yeah.
So I kind of help construction companies or clients
Identify
who does what, where, when, and how much of it.
Great. Yeah, that's fantastic. Actually.
Yeah. So it's what I do is not very complicated. It's really simple. It's extremely simple, but I guess good for me. There are not many people in New Zealand that do what I do.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the failings that I see on the construction side is poor preparation,
Planning
for projects. And I have a JV partnership on my construction company with a master builder company who helped me deliver our buildings. And we were just having a meeting this morning, and I was reiterating that preparation and organisation is the absolute key to productivity.
Yep.
And just being able to, like the Toyota way of doing cars, is the perfect example. And spend 90% of your time actually preparing, and then you execute really well.
Yeah, lean and mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do they say? Prior planning prevents poor performance. 6 P's, right?
And what I said to those guys, they're quite a sizable company, is you should be able to issue the orders for everything you need for one of our developments in construction on the first day. So if you actually think about what you need and you map out all your materials orders and you put them in order, you can actually have them sitting on your system, and your site guy can ring up the office person and say, send order 103, 104 and 105.
Whatever, yeah.
And then they will arrive on site when they need them. And if you're sitting there with a ute and every time you turn up, someone's giving you a list of things that they need you to shoot down to Bunnings to pick up, you haven't organised yourself well. That should be a really odd thing to happen. But actually that's how most construction companies work.
Yeah, procurement's a pretty standard thing you'd expect.
Yeah, you would expect, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
The number of times somebody from a construction company would run over to Mitre 10 or Places is
that's why they have utes. I was telling them, if you could get rid of all those utes and buy your site guys a Mini.
Yeah, right.
Save a fortune.
Okay.
And one of the answers to that actually is using software. There's great software for builders now. And software, to me, is one of the solutions for productivity for construction teams.
I agree and I disagree with that.
Oh, good. Yeah, okay.
Yes, I'm all about construction digitalization. It's kind of my founding principles of my own company. It's construction digitalization.
Yeah.
But not buying any piece of software off the shelf. It's about buying a piece of software that integrates with the bigger ecosystem of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
It's because data is more valuable than gold today.
Yeah.
Right. You see, in the last 10 years, Facebook, Google, Instagram, WhatsApp, all of these different companies, how they built their fortunes. It's through managing good data.
Yeah.
And it's about selling that data onto other people for sales. It's data, and it's how you manage that data.
Yeah.
So buying any piece of software is not the solution. It's buying the right piece of software to solve your problem, which also integrates back into your ecosystem of the company.
Yeah.
So let's say, for instance, you're buying a planning software. I'm a planner. It's probably easier for me to explain it when I relate it to a planning software. You got Microsoft Projects, which is very user-friendly, but does that integrate into different systems that you've got? You want to run cash flows, you said, and you run cash flows, right? Your program is developed in Microsoft Projects. Now, how do you then attribute cost onto that program of works that's developed? Or there's another tool called Primavera P6. There's Ask the Power Project. There's multiple tools, right? How do you pick the right one?
Yeah, well, it is actually quite difficult. And like for us, we do development and construction, and there isn't any software that actually, that I've found that's suitable, that actually, there's not much that's there for developers that I've found anyway. And I mean, I'm older, so I'm not necessarily a very good searcher for those things, but I've had a good look around. There's not that much around that I think is A, cost effective, and B, practical for what we want to do. and certainly how we do it. So we act as like a main contractor developer for clients. We're not the developer. So that's actually quite a different sort of schematic.
There are not many people out there that do what you do, Murray.
No.
Not
I
many.
hope not.
Not many. I don't think I mean, you're either a client or you're either you're building buildings.
Yeah,
you're the contractor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, there's not many people that go through the entire life cycle. You're pretty unique in that way, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually repositioned myself during the first lockdown.
Oh yeah.
On this, so we were doing project management and getting resource consents for projects and so on, and so having a lot of time on my hands during that period, I just thought about what I wanted to do, which was actually much more along the social and affordable housing area, where a lot of people in the construction and development world don't really want to do that bit because there's lower margins and for the time and effort involved. But I'm much more interested in the social impact of those things, and that if you actually apply yourself to actually being a part of the solutions around that area, the commercial result falls out of the bottom rather than it's actually placed in the centre of what you're trying to do.
Right.
So we've got a very good mind around and thinking around what is the commercial response, but actually what we're trying to do is what's the impact on our social fabric about what we do.
Good on you, man.
So so we're really involved in trying to put together. So when I started on the social housing thing a few years ago, my attitude was, what a great investment vehicle. You build these new buildings and you get a government-backed tenant comes in. You've got 10-year, 20-year leases, 100% full. You don't have to manage anything. What a brilliant investment it is, because that's the framework I came from. But I realised after a while that what we're trapping people in is an endless cycle of being poor, because they're not in the housing market, they're in a rental market, and the government's paying for it, or a major portion of it.
Government or the taxpayers?
Or the taxpayer, we are. And so then you get a society, a large part of society that's always in that bracket. And so I've tipped that around to go, how can we create systems where we can lever those people out of that rental model and into home ownership? So they start with social housing, but they end up owning it. And so that's a capital development structure. So that's one of the things that we're working on.
How does that work? How do you affect that change?
Well, government still has to be involved. So they're basically, they're going to underwrite those people for their whole lives. And for me, like my background, I grew up in a state house. So mum, 6 kids, I was the second youngest. Therefore the forgotten child. But what that home did for us was that gave us a real start in life. I only realised this looking back, of course. So before that, when my mother left my father, it was a very gutsy move, because it was at a time where there was no government support. So she just made the move on out. And so the family got split up between all of her brothers and sisters, except for my younger brother and myself, and we stayed with her. We lived in a packing shed in an orchard in Otomaito in Tauranga. And then we obviously applied for a state house, and we got a state house in Gate Park. And so I grew up in that house, and our family came back together. And I still remember the day that we arrived to look at that house. It was brand new, it was empty. And we were in a packing shed, and all we had to separate the living from the little kitchenette thing that she had was a curtain that she made.
Right.
And so we went into this house, and there was bedrooms, and there was wardrobes. You'd open the wardrobe, and there was a footstool for your shoes, and like it was like a palace. Yeah. And it was uncarpeted, it was uninsulated, it was cold as anything in the winter. There were no footpaths or no garaging or anything like that. And my mum's brothers came up and put all that in for us. And then we lived in that house for about probably, 15 years, I suppose, until all of us grew up and went off, and my mum went to a little 2-bedroom one, and then we eventually bought her a unit. And what I see that state house did was it brought our family together, and it made us a cohesive whole. That was happy memories for us as a family. We were a really happy, funny family, and then we lived in that house. We've all gone on to good careers and so on, and
it gave you a platform to launch.
Gave us a platform to go somewhere. We had to take that platform.
Yes, 100%.
But if you leave people trapped, and so what we did is we were eventually able to all go back and take my mum out of that state housing situation and buy her own 2-bedroom unit in Tauranga, and then the lift in her self-esteem was huge when she had her own house.
Her children that have supported her get out of
Yeah,
state
her
housing.
children. So, you know, like...
It's an amazing feeling for a
She
parent.
dedicated herself to us, and then we were able to come back and help her,
Yeah.
which is actually how it should be, of course.
Yeah.
And so I look at that and think that there are thousands of people that need that opportunity. Like in Auckland, we've got about 30,000 people that need a home, that are on the housing register, that or in some way that are requiring homes. They don't have a home. They're in garages and they're in vans. And I don't mean they're homeless on the street. That begging is a different issue, but they are homeless. And so what we need to do is actually create, first of all, housing for them. So that gives them a platform. A good, safe house, healthy house is one of the building planks for a better society for people. But if we can actually get people into home ownership, that's a change of their wealth structure. So you take people from, it's very hard for anyone to go from naught to something. So if you start with something, you can always build. But if you've got naught or you're worse than naught, that's almost impossible hill to get over. So people need help. So what we're looking at doing is programs where the government will assist with the rent, but we create a savings program for those people over a period of time where they can actually eventually take over those houses at the original value that we put them into, and they get the deposit and they can get the debt and they actually can own it. And then that becomes a generational impact on those
for
families.
sure. So when you say how are you creating that savings? How are you helping them create that savings bank?
So that's a matter of actually organising how they actually, what monies they've got. So if you go into a government-assisted house, you pay 25 to 30% of the rent, and the government will pay the balance. So what we've got a capital base to help people with that, but is that helping them in the difference between the rent from the government and the actual cost of money, there's a balance. And so we actually are creating a savings program for those people out of their rental flow.
Based on the rental structure they set up, you actually siphon in some funds to put aside.
And we're putting it aside
as
rather
a piggy
than
bank.
taking it, or any of the party that's sitting there as the landlord, rather than taking it as a profit, it's actually going as a savings program for those people.
Wow.
And then that over, it might be 30 years, but over that period of time, they come off that government support and they go into actually a home ownership.
So that way you actually, if I was in a state housing, you're giving me incentive to actually contribute more towards the rent.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Commendable.
Got to prove it up first, but
is this a working concept?
This is a working concept that we're working on, but we're a long way down the track on it.
And you think it'll succeed?
Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts to it.
I agree.
But one of those is the initial capital to develop. So we have a source for that. But we have to fit the criteria for that capital, and that's not a harsh criteria, but we've still got to do that. So that's one, and then the government program is another one. Then you have to have. We are mostly focused on Māori and Pacifica, because their housing ownership rates are really, really low compared to the rest of New Zealand, and certainly to Pākehā. So part of our goal is to focus on Māori and Pacifica and get them up.
Good on you, mate. No, well done. That's really commendable. And I wish you all the success. And
thanks very much. Yeah, appreciate it.
No, I'm here sitting thinking how I can actually help contribute, but
I'll be tapping on your door.
Anytime, mate. Anytime, no problem. Happy to help. Absolutely happy to help. But hey, Murray, I think we're a bit over time, and this has been a really interesting conversation. And I think it's time for us to wrap up. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to ask me or share?
I'd be really interested in how your operation works on the planning side. Well, we've got some quite large. So you're high rise.
I'm not necessarily.
And we are low rise, but we're actually walking into sort of 100, 200 house type things, and that can always do way better planning. And I would imagine you're way brainier about that than I am. I'm reasonably well organised, but I'm not an academic person, so I've started as a carpenter and I've worked my way up into all of these things, and I'm self-taught. So someone who actually knows better about it will be always welcome.
I'm absolutely happy to help, and I'm sure we'll have a few more of these discussions. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
Oh, cool!
I really
That's
did.
great. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And thank you so much for your time once again.
My pleasure. Yeah.
And also, everybody, we've got these new strategic planning branded cups. So if you want a cup, hit me up. Murray's just got his. It's not here.
Yeah,
it's there somewhere. Thanks, everybody.